A high-explosive anti-tank warhead is a type of munition made of an explosive-shaped charge that employs the Munroe effect to create a high-velocity partial stream of metal in a state of superplasticity, which is used to penetrate solid vehicle armor. It is used in weapons such as the @4 single-shot rocket launcher all the way up to the warheads of main battle tanks. The heat warhead has become less effective against tanks and other armored vehicles due to the use of Chobham armor and explosive-reactive armor. Systems such as the Russian T-90 main battle tank, infantry weapons such as the US Army FGM-148 Javelin attack the top of tanks where armor is typically thinner than the front and side armor. History. Heat warheads were developed during World War II, from extensive research and development into shaped charge warheads. Shaped charge warheads were promoted internationally by the Swiss inventor Henry Mohaupt, who exhibited the weapon before World War II. Before 1939, Mohaupt demonstrated his invention to British and French ordnance authorities. Concurrent development by the German inventors group of Kranz, Chardin, and Tomanek led to the first documented use of shaped charges in warfare. During the successful assault on the fortress of Eben-Emael on 10 May 1940, claims for priority of invention are difficult to resolve due to subsequent historic interpretations, secrecy, espionage, and international commercial interest. The first British heat weapon to be developed and issued was a rifle grenade using a 63.5 mm cup launcher on the end of the rifle barrel. The grenade, rifle No. 68, which was first issued to the British Armed Forces in the year 1940. This has some claim to have been the first heat warhead and launcher in use. The design of the warhead was simple and was capable of penetrating 52 mm of armor. The fuse of the grenade was armed by removing a pin in the tail which prevented the firing pin from flying forward. Simple fins gave it stability in the air and, provided the grenade hit the target at the proper angle of 90 degrees, the charge would be effective. Detonation occurred on impact, when a striker in the tail of the grenade overcame the resistance of a creep spring and was thrown forward into a stab detonator. By mid-1940, Germany introduced the first heat round to be fired by a gun, the 7.5 cm fired by the KW. K.37L-24 of the Panzer IV tank and the Stug-3 self-propelled gun. In mid-1941, Germany started the production of heat rifle grenades, first issued to paratroopers and, by 1942, to the regular army units, but, just as did the British, soon turned to integrated warhead delivery systems. In 1943 the Pupchen, Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust were introduced. The Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck gave the German infantrymen the ability to destroy any tank on the battlefield from 50 to 150 meters with relative ease of use and training. The Germans made use of large quantities of heat ammunition in converted 7.5 cm back 97/38 guns from 1942, also fabricating heat warheads for the Mistral weapon. These so-called Schwerholadung warheads were intended for use against heavily armored battleships. Operational versions weighed nearly 2 tons and were perhaps the largest heat warheads ever deployed. A 5-ton version, code-named Beethoven, was also developed. Meanwhile, the British No. 68 rifle grenade was proving to be too light to deal significant damage, resulting in it rarely being used in action. Due to these limits, a new infantry anti-tank weapon was needed, and this ultimately came in the form of the Projector infantry anti-tank, or PIAT. By 1942, the PI-80 had been developed by Major Millis Jeffress. It was a combination of a heat warhead with a spigot mortar delivery system. While cumbersome, the weapon allowed British infantry to engage armour at range for the first time. The earlier magnetic handmines and grenades required them to approach dangerously near. During World War II, the British referred to the Munroe effect as the cavity effect on explosives. During the war, the French communicated Henry Mohaupt technology to the U.S. Ordnance Department, and he was invited to the USA, where he worked as a consultant on the bazooka project. The need for a large bore made heat rounds relatively ineffective in existing small-caliber anti-tank guns of the era. Germany worked around this with the steel grenade 41, introducing a round that was placed over the end on the outside of otherwise obsolete 37mm anti-tank guns to produce a medium-range, low-velocity weapon. Adaptations to existing tank guns were somewhat more difficult, although all major forces had done so by the end of the war, since velocity has little effect on the armor-piercing ability of the round, which is defined by explosive power. Heat rounds were particularly useful in long-range combat where slower terminal velocity was not an issue. The Germans were again the ones to produce the most capable gun-fired heat rounds, using a driving band on bearings to allow it to fly unspun from their existing rifle tank guns. The heat round was particularly useful to them because it allowed the low-velocity large-bore guns used on the many assault guns to also become useful anti-tank weapons. Likewise, the Germans, Italians, and Japanese had in service many obsolescent infantry guns, short-barrel, low-velocity artillery pieces capable of direct and indirect fire and intended for infantry support. Similar in tactical role to mortars, generally an infantry battalion had a battery of 4 or 6 high-explosive anti-tank rounds. For these old infantry guns made them semi-useful anti-tank guns, particularly the German 150mm guns. High-explosive anti-tank rounds caused a revolution in anti-tank warfare when they were first introduced in the later stages of World War II. One infantryman could effectively destroy any existing tank with a handheld weapon, thereby dramatically altering the nature of mobile operations. During World War II, weapons using heat warheads were termed hollow charge or shape charge warheads. Post-war, the general public remained in the dark about shape charge warheads, even believing that it was a new secret explosive, until early 1945 when the US Army cooperated with the US monthly publication Popular Science on a large and detailed article on the subject titled, "It Makes Steel Flow Like Mud." It was this article that revealed to the American public how the fabled bazooka actually worked against tanks and that the velocity of the rocket was irrelevant. Most Americans were shocked to learn that even their enemies in World War II had what the US Army referred to as shape charge warhead weapons. After the war, heat rounds became almost universal as the primary anti-tank weapon. Variants of varying effectiveness were produced for almost all weapons, from infantry weapons like rifle grenades and the M203 grenade launcher, to larger dedicated anti-tank systems like the Carl Gustav recoilless rifle. When combined with the wire-guided missile, infantry weapons were able to operate at long ranges also. Anti-tank missiles altered the nature of tank warfare throughout the 1960s and into the 80s, and remain effective. Design. Affect. The stream moves at hypersonic speeds in solid material and therefore erodes exclusively in the contact area of jet and armor material. The correct detonation point of the warhead and spacing is critical for optimum penetration for two reasons. If the heat warhead is detonated too near a target surface, there is not enough time for the particle stream to fully develop. That is why most modern heat warheads have what is called a standoff, in the form of an extended nose kappa probe in front of the warhead. The distance is critical because the stream disintegrates and disperses after a short distance, usually well under 2 meters. The stream material is formed by a cone of metal foil lining, usually copper, though ductile iron and tin foil was commonly used during World War II. The key to the effectiveness of a heat round is the diameter of the warhead. As the penetration continues through the armor, the width of the hole decreases, leading to a characteristic fist-to-finger penetration, where the size of the eventual finger is based on the size of the original fist. In general, very early heat rounds could expect to penetrate armor of 150% to 250% of the diameters, and these numbers were typical of early weapons used during World War II. Since then, the penetration of heat rounds relative to projectile diameters has steadily increased as a result of improved liner material and metal jet performance. Some modern examples claim numbers as high as 700%. Stabilization and accuracy. Heat warheads are less effective if spinning, and grow ever less effective with faster spin. This became a challenge for weapon designers. For a long time, spinning a shell was the most standard method to obtain good accuracy, as with any rifled gun. However, the centrifugal force of a spinning shell disperses the charge jet. Thus, most hollow charge projectiles are fin-stabilized and not spin-stabilized. In recent years, it has become possible to use shaped charges in spin-stabilized projectiles by imparting an opposite spin on the jet so that the two spins cancel out and result in a non-spinning jet. This is done either using fluted copper liners, which have raised ridges, or by forming the liner in such a way that it has a crystalline structure which imparts spin to the jet. Besides spin stabilization, another problem with any barreled weapon is that a large diameter shell has worse accuracy than a small diameter shell of the same weight. The lessening of accuracy increases dramatically with range. Paradoxically, this leads to situations when a kinetic armor-piercing projectile is more usable at long ranges than a heat projectile, despite the latter having a higher armor penetration. To illustrate this, a stationary Soviet T-62 tank, firing a cannon at a range of 1,000 meters against a target moving 19 kilometers per hour, was rated to have a first-round hit probability of 70% when firing a kinetic projectile. Under the same conditions, it could expect 25% when firing a heat round. This affects combat on open battlefield with long lines of sight. The same T-62 could expect a 70% first-round hit probability using heat rounds on target at 500 meters. A further problem is that, if the warhead is contained inside the barrel, its diameter becomes overly restricted by the caliber of that barrel. In non-gun applications, when heat warheads are delivered with missiles, rockets, bombs, grenades, or spigot mortars, the warhead size is no longer a limiting factor. In these cases, heat warheads often seem oversized in relation to the round's body. Classic examples of this include the German Panzerfaust and Soviet RPG-7 variants. Many heat-armed missiles today have two separate warheads to be more effective against reactive or multi-layered armor. The first, smaller warhead initiates the reactive armor, while the second, larger warhead penetrates the armor below. This approach requires highly sophisticated fusing electronics to set off the two warheads the correct time apart, and also special barriers between the warheads to stop unwanted interference interactions. This makes them cost more to produce. The latest heat warheads, such as 3B A31, feature triple charges. The first penetrates the spaced armor, the second the reactive or first layers of armor, and the third one finishes the penetration. The total penetration value may reach up to 800 mm. Some anti-armor weapons incorporate a variant on the shaped charge concept that, depending on the source, can be called an explosively formed penetrator, self-forging fragment, self-forging projectile, plate charge, or Misneh-Shah-Dam charge. This warhead type uses the interaction of the detonation wave, and to a lesser extent the propulsive effect of the detonation products, to deform a displate of metal into a slug-shaped projectile of low length to diameter ratio and project this towards the target at around 2 km per second. The SFF is relatively unaffected by first-generation reactive armor. It can also travel more than 1,000 cone diameters before its velocity becomes ineffective at penetrating armor due to aerodynamic drag, or hitting the target becomes a problem. The impact of a SFF normally causes a large diameter, but relatively shallow hole of, at best, a few cds. If the SFF perforates the armor, extensive behind-armor damage occurs. The bad is mainly caused by the high temperature and velocity, armor and slug fragments being injected into the interior space, and also overpressure, caused by the impact. More modern SFF warhead versions, through the use of advanced initiation modes, can also produce rods, multi-slugs and finned projectiles, and this in addition to the standard short L-to-D ratio projectile. The stretched slugs are able to penetrate a much greater depth of armor at some loss to bad. Multi-slugs are better at defeating light and or area targets, and the finned projectiles have greatly enhanced accuracy. The use of this warhead type is mainly restricted to lightly armored areas of MBTs, the top, belly, and rear armored areas for example. It is well suited for use in the attack of other less heavily armored fighting vehicles and for breaching material targets. The newer rod projectiles may be effective against the more heavily armored areas of MBTs. Weapons using the SEFOP principle have already been used in combat. The smart sub-munitions in the CBU-97 cluster bomb used by the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy in the 2003 Iraq War used this principle, and the U.S. Army is reportedly experimenting with precision-guided artillery shells under Projector SADARM. There are also various other projectile and rocket sub-munitions and mines that use SFF principle, with the effectiveness of gun-fired single-charge heat rounds being lessened or even negated by increasingly sophisticated armoring techniques. A class of heat rounds termed high-explosive anti-tank multi-purpose, or heat MP, has become more popular. These are heat rounds that are effective against older tanks and lighter armored vehicles, but have improved fragmentation, blast and fusing. This gives the projectiles an overall reasonable light armor and anti-personnel material effect so that they can be used in place of conventional, high-explosive rounds against infantry and other battlefield targets. This reduces the total number of rounds that need to be carried for different roles, which is particularly important for modern tanks like the M1 Abrams, due to the size of the 120 mm rounds. The M1A1, M1A2 tank can carry only 40 rounds for its 120 mm M256 gun. The M60A3 Patton tank carried 63 rounds for its 105 mm M68 gun. This effect is reduced by the higher first round hit rate of the Abrams with its improved fire control system compared to the M60. The frequent Refueling needed for the Abrams's fuel-hungry turbine also makes simultaneous ordnance resupply a marginal burden. HEDP, another variant of heat warheads, is surrounding them with a conventional fragmentation casing, to allow the warhead to be more effectively used for blast and fragmentation attacks on unarmored targets. In some cases, this is merely a side effect of the armor-piercing design. In other cases, a dual role is specifically designed in. Some warheads have been termed high-explosive dual-purpose defense. Improvements to the armor of main battle tanks have reduced the usefulness of heat warheads by making man-portable heat missiles heavier. Although many of the world's armies continue to carry man-portable heat rocket launches for use against vehicles and bunkers, in unusual cases, shoulder-launched heat rockets are believed to have shot down U.S. helicopters in Iraq. The reason for the ineffectiveness of heat munitions against modern main battle tanks can be attributed in part to the use of new types of armor. The jet created by the explosion of the heat round must be a certain distance from the target and must not be deflected. Reactive armor attempts to defeat this with an outward-directed explosion under the impact point, causing the jet to deform and so greatly reducing penetrating power. Alternatively, composite armor featuring ceramics erode the liner jet faster than rolled homogeneous armor steel, the preferred material in constructing older armored fighting vehicles. Spaced armor and slat armor are also designed to defend against heat rounds, protecting vehicles by causing premature detonation of the explosive at a relatively safe distance away from the main armor of the vehicle. Deployment. Helicopters have carried anti-tank guided missiles tipped with heat warheads since 1956. The first example of this was the use of the Nord SS-11 ATGM on the aerospatial Alouette 2 helicopter by the French Armed Forces. After then, such weapon systems were widely adopted by other nations. On 13 April 1972, during the Second Indochina War, Americans Chief Warrant Officer Barry McIntyre, Major Larry McKay, First Lieutenant Steve Shields, and Captain Bill Causey became the first helicopter crewmen to destroy enemy armor in combat. A flight of two R-1 Cobra helicopters, dispatched from Battery F, 79th Artillery, 1st Cavalry Division, were armed with the newly developed M247 70mm heat rockets, which were yet untested in the theater of war. The specially modified Huey destroyed three T-54 tanks that were about to overrun a U.S. command post. McIntyre and McKay engaged first, destroying the lead tank.